All right, welcome back. Yes, we've got Dr. Isiaq Salako, who is the Minister of State for the Environment. He joins us here in the studios. Good morning, and thank you for coming on today.
Thank you very much.
Well, I know that different people see the environment issues differently, and sometimes, but haven't resumed your office, and you must have weighed the task ahead of you. And I know that when you ask certain people what they thought about previous ministers of environment, I mean, the ones who did ask, they just wondered, scratched their heads. But for you, what's your approach to tackle the job in your ministry?
Thank you very much. First, let me say that environmental challenges are global issues emanating from key phenomena. The phenomena of global warming, which is causing climate change, and then we have loss of biodiversity, and of course, the issue of pollution. Those three phenomena work together to create the challenges that we're facing in the Earth environment, and Nigeria is not an exception. So you find out that the challenges of the environment, as it's available in other parts of the world, it is also here with us in Nigeria. And if you look at what are the major challenges that we have, you see that on top of the challenges we have challenges of deforestation and desertification, especially in the northern part of Nigeria. And then when you come to the south, you see challenges of erosion, flood, and then you see general challenge of solid waste management, particularly in urban centers. So the way to approach it, therefore, is to see how we can integrate all this, because, like I said, the causative factors are similar. And if you do not properly integrate the way we approach it, you will see that the solutions at the end of the day may not be long-lasting.
But how are you and your ministry going to work with other ministries to ensure that their efforts to reduce the impacts on the climate is harmonized?
That's very, very important. And for us, for example, at the moment, we have a presidential committee on flood management, because the government realizes that not one agency of government can actually do the work that is needed to control, to mitigate, and to prevent flooding. So you have environment, you have water resources, you have NIMET, you have NEMA, and also the agencies as part of it. The same thing, we now have what we call a climate change council, where this is also an interagency council that everybody that is involved can come in and cooperate. So that robust cooperation is there for us to ensure that this thing is not taken from one angle alone, it's taken from several angles. And everybody, if you look at the way the flood issue is now being handled, NIMET, the Hydrological Services Agency, they do prediction, and then they will tell us the alerts. And in the Ministry of Environment, we have early flood warning systems that we can give a 5-day warning that in 5 days' time, from all the parameters we have, flood is likely to happen in such and such and such area. That is cooperation. And that is why you see that we have a more robust approach. And then, of course, the emergency response now comes from NEMA in terms of palliatives, moving people, and providing for their immediate needs. So that is the kind of cooperation that we need generally to manage environmental issues, which we are doing very, very well here.
Well, it was appear that, over the years, we haven't quite, we see that we know about these things, but at the level of government, there has not been so much of a will. We see the steps sometimes, but the will to actually prioritize it. For instance, now you've talked about, the challenges that we face in different areas, and each geopolitical zone seems to have its own peculiar challenge. Say from the north now, desertification is something that we've been struggling with. Talking about the Great Green Wall, which they've been trying to build, we wonder how much zeal has gone into building that great green wall. So we realize a problem, we come up with a solution, but to implement the solutions that we come up with then becomes a challenge of sorts. If you go to the Niger Delta, we've identified oil spill as a major problem. The Ogoni cleanup, we've been seeing just how slowly, painfully slow, it's coming up with, and even in some instances, we even see controversy. So for you, looking at the current challenges that we are facing in almost every area of every single geopolitical zone having its own problems, and even rural versus urban also having their own challenges as well. What exactly which areas will you be prioritizing? Which ones will you say, look, we need to show more zeal? These ones we can quickly get a quick win in these areas.
Well, thank you very much. First, let me let you know that managing environmental challenges is hugely expensive, because these are natural resources which are gifts from God, which over the years we have misused. And restoration of such things really takes time. It's like if you collapse a house. For you to get back that house, it's not going to be the same way that the house was destroyed. So it takes a lot of resources to do it. But for us in the ministry, we are trying to prioritize areas that we see that even in the last administration, some level of achievement has been made and some good structure is on ground, so that we are not necessarily trying to recreate the wheel. For example, the Ogoni cleanup that you mentioned, there's already a structure in place that is trying to do all the needed things to clean up, not just the Ogoni, but starting with Ogoni, the Niger Delta in its entirety, but starting with the 4 local governments in Ogoni land. And what we have found in the last 1 week that I have resumed, and my review is that we have a robust system in place, and we have a robust action plan in place. All we just need is to get adequate funding and proper oversight to ensure that that is done. So we're going to prioritize that.
So you think that it is funding now that has been in the way? Because we understand there was international support for this. The United Nations was involved. I mean, HIPREP was supposed to be the body that was set up to be able to take charge of that. Is it that there isn't sufficient funding? Is that why?
No, we have fund. But the system of assessing fund is also has some bureaucracy to be able to assess them. There's fund available to approach the challenge, but clearly it's not that you just wake up tomorrow and said, okay, I take the money and say, there's a process that you need to follow. So we are going to use that, the fund that is available and the system that is already in place, the bureaucratic system that is already in place, to try and approach that. So we are prioritizing that. The other thing we are going to prioritize is municipal waste management. You know that the environment issue is on the concurrent list, which means that as the federal government has responsibility, the state also has responsibility, local government has responsibility, even NGOs, individuals. And what we have found in the last 1 week that I have been here is that there is no enough synergy between all these levels of government and corporate organizations and NGOs that has responsibilities over the environment in trying to solve environmental issues. As an example, if you look at the way we manage the plastic waste, as an example, which is a huge problem globally and in Nigeria especially. Whereas Nigeria is not mature enough for banning single-use plastic. But we can have a mentoring system at the federal level that can dovetail into the state and the local government in the way we manage plastic that can become a national system. And we're coming with a system when the manufacturers of bottled water, for example, when they manufacture bottled water, there's a logistics system that takes the bottled water from the manufacturer to the end user. There should also be a logistics system, a reverse logistics system, that takes that waste back without a break to the manufacturer or people who use those waste products, because those waste products are very useful. But what we have is that there's no such national system that everybody can key into. So everybody is just doing his own bit, small.
Create that.
Yes, we are going to create that. So what we want to do is create that kind of national system where there's a reverse logistics system. As it comes back to you, it also goes back through another system. Those who transport bottled water, for example, from the factory to end users, they go back empty. Their vehicles go back empty. Why can't we have a system, rather than going back empty, they go back with the plastics?
Well, that's going to take a lot of awareness creation, which is part of the function of the Ministry of Environment. But another thing that I think is important, which doesn't need funding, you may correct me if I'm wrong, is and sensitizing people to ensure that certain areas are kept for the very purposes for which they are made. For instance, wetlands are being built up. In Festac Town, which I understand, unless that has been changed, is a federal, residential estate. All the play areas there have mostly been built up. Most of the play areas have been built up, if not all, totally. And, so that has already taken away whatever intentions there were for that particular estate. And that is just one of countless examples. Green areas in the nation have also been eroded by one influence or the other. Gratifyingly, the Minister of the FCT is already saying, we're going to reclaim these lands. Are you going to replicate the same thing all over the nation? It is important to talk about this because, we can't talk about climate change and the rest of them and doing the needful if we are not talking about reclaiming, giving the space where nature is supposed to occupy back to it.
Yeah, very, very correct. One of our mandates in the ministry is awareness creation, sensitization, and educating the people on environmental issues, which we hope to also work very hard on. When it comes to the issue of planning, urban planning, housing, and all that, whereas it's not directly under the jurisdiction of the ministry, but I believe that it is really a two-way thing. Yes, there's some failure of government not enforcing regulations, not enforcing planning laws. But there's an important thing with communities. Because when you are in a community and somewhere is designated as a play area, and somebody comes there to build house, and all of you in that community does not rise up and face that individual, there's also a failure of the people, as it were. So it is a two-way thing. And the advocacy that I would like to preach is that we do not sit back in such things. All of us must see that when the environment is abused in our community and we do not rise up to ensure that we face the individual, all of us will suffer the consequence. When flood comes into everybody's house. So I believe that it is therefore, as government is doing its own, we need a more robust mobilization of the people so that we can also take our responsibility in ensuring proper and sustainable use of the environment.
Buki.
From Lagos. I wonder if I have missed it. I wonder if my colleagues have brought to your attention the headlines from today's newspapers reminding us about the plans by Cameroon to open the Lagdo Dam. And, this immediately takes us down memory lane to 2022 when the dam was opened, and not a few attributed it to the massive flooding experienced in many states. At that time, the former Minister of the Environment had said that the flooding experience was not as a result of the opening of the dam, but as a result of rainfall. Regardless of that position, in 2023, NEMA has advised residents to relocate to safe places. I wonder what your position is, or what the official position of the ministry is on the planned opening of the Lagdo Dam this year. Will it result in massive flooding as we experienced in 2022? And more importantly, should Nigerians be worried? And what are the long-term plans of mitigation should the dam be opened this year and in the near future?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, the ministry is aware, and I'm sure most Nigerians are aware, that Cameroon wants to open that dam. But thankfully, it's a kind of, it's not a sudden opening. So the management of the opening of that dam is going to cause less severe flooding, like we envisage. That's what we envisage. Compared to 2022, we do not envisage seeing such kind of thing that we saw in 2022. However, you know that there's been a lot of warnings, alerts to request people who are living in the banks of River Benue to relocate to higher grounds. So we expect that some flooding will occur as a result of the opening of that dam. And it is inevitable, because if the dam itself overflows on its own, the disaster that it will cause will be worse. So it's better to have a managed release of the water in the dam to ensure that the damage is not as much. On the issue of long-term flooding, prevention of flooding from that opening of that dam, for some time now, there's been an approach by the government of Nigeria to build another dam in Adamawa State so that it can hold some of the water when the Cameroon Dam is opened. So I think going forward, what will help us is if we are able to, of course, implement the dam that is projected, that is planned to be built. I think the project is actually ongoing, but it's taking a while. But hopefully, under this administration, we can play more focus on it and ensure. But that really is not under the purview of the Ministry of Environment. Again, of course, we've done a lot of sensitization, and now we have a more robust alert system compared to 2022. So we're able to predict earlier that when flooding is going to occur and take measures to ensure that the damages are reduced and there's no loss of life.
So if I get you correctly, Dr. Salako, the opening of the dam is responsible for some degree of flooding, but not flooding on a massive scale.
Yes, when we talk about flooding, there are really three factors. You talk about torrential rainfall. When the rainfall is heavy, that can cause flooding. And then you can also have rivers on their own, because the rivers are not as deep as they ought to be because of silt. Then the rivers can easily overflow, and then we have what we call the coastal flooding from the oceans. So what we're having now is going to be overflow of river, because when the water is released from the dam, it makes the river Benue to overflow its boundaries, and then that can spill into other areas. Of course, the contributory factor of the rainfall is also there, because when there is persistent rainfall, what it means is that more water is also accumulating in the dams, and then the authorities of the dam will have no choice but to release some of the water so that there is no sudden destruction of the dam, and which will cause more damage. So some level of flooding is expected as a result of that opening of dam, and I think the warnings is all there. Even the Cameroonian authority wrote the Nigerian authority to inform the Nigerian, and this is also a reflection of the level of cooperation and the level of awareness that we have between the two governments.
So is the federal ministry working with the Cameroonian authorities for the gradual release of the water, as you talked about?
Yes, that is the whole essence. The release is going to be gradual, so that the flow is not sudden. It's going to be a gradual and controlled release of the water.
One more thing.
But, again, like I must say, that management of that is within the purview of the Ministry of Water Resources, not Environment.
So one more thing from me, Dr. Salako, on the matter of ecological funds, on our sister program, Politics Today, we had the Federal Commission of the Complaints Commission investigating the expenditure of these funds, talk about how 8 states have only come forward with their account books, and how they're still investigating, and they have not been able to determine the extent of the efficacy of the expenditure of these funds. But one thing that you also talked about is that the funds are not released to the state as at when due. I wonder if this has come under your leadership, at the Federal Ministry of Environment, and what you can report about the expenditure of ecological funds.
Well, thank you very much. The ecological fund actually is not directly under the purview of the Ministry of Environment. And I guess this is because when they're talking about managing the ecological system, it is beyond one agency or one ministry. And therefore, we do not have direct and total oversight in the Ministry of Environment over the Ecological Fund. We're able to assess it when we have issues that fit into the mandate of that Ecological Fund. So I am not in place to account for how that fund is being expended. It's actually warehoused in the SGF office, which, and of course, the SGF have more oversight of the different agencies and ministries than one ministry will do.
When does the Ministry of Environment have in that you have to give an imprimatur to ecological matters before the SGF can think that this is important enough for us to deploy the ecological funds to handle
There's actually a committee, and the Ministry of Environment is part of that committee. And when we'll have projects within the ministry that fit the mandate of the Ecological Fund, we approach the Ecological Fund through the representative of the ministry, and then we're able to assess it. But like I said, there are other agencies that are doing ecological things that are not environment, and they are also able to assess such fund. For example, if you look at some of the things that we're doing with renewable energy, it also has some ecological parts, and they are also able to assess such funds. So it's not exclusive to the Ministry of Environment.
All right, just a short break, but we'll be back and then take a few more questions from you in just a moment. Don't go away.
Welcome back to Sunrise Daily on Channels Television, where we still have the Minister of State for Environment with us, Dr. Isiaq Salako, and we've been engaging him on a number of issues, including the opening of the planned opening of the Lagdo Dam, by the Cameroonian government, and the position of NEMA, that Nigerians should relocate to safe places. And indeed, Dr. Salako has told us that there will be coordination between the Federal Ministry of Environment and the Cameroonian government for the dam to be open in phases, such that the impact of the flooding will not be, as intense as what we experienced in 2022, when quite a number of deaths were recorded and a number of people, that's over 1 million too, were displaced. And he's also said that, yes, indeed, the opening of the dam has an impact, on flooding, because the water will be released to the environment, and by extension, the river Benue, will be impacted, particularly because a number of, these rivers are not silted. So to an extent, the opening of the the opening of the dam will have an impact on flooding. This is, significantly different from the position of the former Minister of Environment, at the height of the flooding in 2022, had said that, that the flooding was as a result of rainfall, not as a result of the opening of the Lagdo Dam. But more importantly, we've also asked him about long-term plans by the federal government, to mitigate the impact of the opening of the dam in the future. And he's talked about how there are plans to build an alternate dam back home in Nigeria, in Adamawa State to be precise, that can take in some of the water that will be released, by the Cameroonian government from the Lagdo Dam. These are some of the concerns, that we have as far as the environment is concerned. We also have more questions for Dr. Isiaq Salako, who's still with us in our Abuja studio.
So let's wind down with this. When will the rivers Niger and Benue be dredged?
It's a big question. Even outside government, before I became a minister, perhaps even when I was much younger, and now we've always talked about the need to dredge those two rivers. I may not be able to give you an answer that it will be done at this time because it's a hugely capital-intensive thing. And some of these things does not, for example, River Benue takes its source from Cameroon. If you want to dredge it, it's not a decision totally of Nigeria, So I believe it will take time to achieve some of these things. But one thing I can tell you is that Mr. President, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, is heavily committed to making life better and easier for the people of Nigeria. And I believe that one of the ways that can be done is to ensure that we prevent disasters. Because if you are fighting poverty and people are exposed to disasters, it can push them back even into poverty. So whereas I cannot give a timeline, I believe that we're going to push very hard, and God helping us, we will get it done.
All right, so as we close, will the ministry be going to the African Climate Summit next week and then the UN summits later? What do you intend to achieve to ensure that it's not just another travel jamboree?
Well, the African Climate Week, which is holding in Kenya, the ministry will be going, and basically is a preparatory event to the event in November, December in Dubai, and is to get the African position, as it were, so that Africa can go there with a position that is harmonized. One of the key areas that I believe Nigeria will be pushing, Mr. President is either going or representative is also invited, and he will be leading the delegation, either the president himself or his representative, and will be pushing the position of Nigeria at that summit. Key areas that I believe that we have found out over the years that international donors and partners, when we have summits like this, they come and make a lot of promises, and we find out that the whole global world hear about those promises. Then we now have to struggle to see that those promises are fulfilled. That's one. Then two is that we also need to push to ensure that developing countries in Africa and elsewhere are not just treated as beggars and receivers of handouts. We need more support in terms of building capacities, in terms of even improving our own efficiency as in doing some of these things. So those are the kind of positions that's asking for more support from the international community, not only from in area of funding, in areas of increasing our capacities and our efficiencies, so that we can do some of these things better. Of course, like I said, what we are going to achieve there is an harmonization of the African position. All
right, Udo, thank you for coming on, and we wish you all the best. Dr. Isiaq Salako is the Minister of State for the Environment.